Kill Knight is a really cool game, but it does have some serious flaws. This is a really good review by my friend Musashi. Let's see. Not recommended, 23.5 hours played at review time. I was the first player to clear the game, and I reviewed the game positively, but have changed my opinion, so let me explain why. Summary. The game has a strong enough foundation for a good twin-stick shooter, but some design decisions hold it back and reduce its longevity, making it become stale quicker than should happen for an arcade game. Lack of playstyle variety. This game features a loadout system where you choose your primary weapon, secondary, armor type, cloak, sword. You can mix and match whatever gear. The problem is the changes are superficial at worst and diffident at best. For example, basically all of the primary weapons, which are called pistols, are in reality all just your typical twin-stick machine gun, albeit with slightly varied fire rate, damage per shot, and magazine size. The main alteration to all of the gear is the change in rhythm of things, like when you reload rather than a fundamental playstyle change. Resource management supersedes enemy or level design depth. The game is heavily resource management / rhythm based where you use X weapon to get ammo for Y weapon, which in itself isn't an issue. The problem is the approach to enemy and level design also introduce more superficial threats than fundamentally different approaches to deal with threats. For example, several enemies have parryable attacks that insta-kill them, and these parry windows are huge and hard to miss. So many of the enemies, despite their different attacks, get insta-killed regardless. Environmental hazards like floor spikes become pointless when standing still, and a twin stick is usually never done to begin with. There just wasn't much design thought put into these kinds of details, and the resource management aspect, because center focus, which in all honesty gets tedious and makes you feel you're doing so many unnecessary actions that don't really add depth to the game. The depth of the game shifts to being around sort of learning the best pattern or order to use your various weapons to clear the stage fastest for a good score, which doesn't really feel fun for very long. The game has more attack options than a typical twin stick, but puts players in a straitjacket by the emphasis of resource management when it could have led to an interesting sort of Devil May Cry style open-endedness. See, I've just given my thoughts on some of this so far. It's like, yeah, a lot of the weapons, not only the pistols, but a lot of the heavy weapons are just copy-paste with a slight, that don't really play very different, just slight variations. The resource management aspect, I like more than Musashi does, because honestly, I'm just a god at twin sticks. I have way too many hours in twin sticks, and one of the things I like about Kill Knight is that it is ridiculously hard. Like, it's basically like the QWOP / Getting Over It of twin sticks. You've probably heard of Getting Over It. You might not have heard of QWOP. QWOP is the weird running game that was the first game or an earlier game made by the dev of Getting Over It. So yeah, it is a bit unnecessarily difficult in odd ways, but god damn it, I'm too good at twin sticks, and I need that unnecessarily difficultness to hold me back. Let's see. Yeah, just the biggest part to put emphasis on, the game has more attack options than a typical twin stick, but puts players in a straitjacket by the emphasis of resource management, when it could have led to an interesting sort of Devil May Cry style open-endedness. Yeah, that's true. The game really holds itself back. It's about customizability, but has basically very little to no customizability, and very little to no depth and difference in the different options. Poor replay value. Part of this, as already covered, is due to the weak stage and enemy design. The major threat in the game appears in Stage 1, the stage lasers that you must dash through. This mechanic is used in all stages and is essentially the only environmental stage element that feels relevant. The laser patterns change level to level, and new enemies are added, and the color palette changes, but all levels feel very samey because many of the new enemies you can just parry, and the lasers are a cheap way to try to add difficulty, and doesn't really work. Upping the game's difficulty shows this flaw, as due to the way the core weapon / attack mechanics are designed, you can't really increase the difficulty by adding more enemies on screen, because the nature of the player mechanics reward you for having more enemies on screen. Many attacks insta-kill enemies, and killing enemies gives you more health shards, so large groups of enemies are just large, instantly killable mobs that drop huge amounts of health, letting you recover back to full health even from no health left. The boss, there's only one, of the game is also pretty poor, probably the worst twin-stick boss for a major twin-stick title I've played. So yeah, I kind of like the boss, although most people critique it for being too hard. I critique it for being too easy, because if you know what to do, then the boss is like super easy every time, and you could kill every phase before it even gets a chance to start. Yeah, back to reading. Most of the difficulty of the boss comes from the floor being so reflective that the bullets it shoots causes a confusing visual effect where it's hard to tell if a bullet is the reflection or not. The boss's attack patterns are generic and poorly done. As of December 12, there's also no real modes to the game, but next week's update seeks to add another mode. But I'm curious to see if it will really add anything. Post-commentary on this, the new mode does not really add anything as far as stages or gameplay goes. It's just one of the 5 levels, but with a specific loadout, which is cool because it forces players to use bad equipment, but at the same time, it doesn't really add anything. Okay, back to reading. After clearing the game, you unlock Sever Mode, which is essentially an arcade mode where you play all the levels back to back. But hello, this is an arcade game. Presenting all the levels together rather than one by one as a new mode is simply cheap and lazy. Sever Mode does introduce some new enemy patterns and flair, but it feels minor, and also like they should have been in the base level to begin with, and don't do enough to make the game deep. The bullet/enemy attack patterns themselves are also extremely underdeveloped. In fact, you can clear like 90% of the game simply running around in a circle while shooting, circle strafing, which further reduces its longevity. And an interesting point to add onto this is that all of the pistols but one require circle strafing, and the one pistols that don't are they're the broken pistols. They're the AoE pistols. Okay. Back to this. Some good things. Scoring system is decently deep. If you find the core game loop interesting enough to keep playing, you may like the scoring system, as there's good interplay between the score mechanics. I actually strongly disagree with this. I think the score mechanic is one of the worst in any games, because speed is so worthless that you can have several minutes slower in a single level and still have way higher score, because the things that you're supposed to do to get score are just so unnatural and just breaks up the flow of the game way too much. So yeah, I strongly disagree with this point. Now right here, good aesthetic, yeah. Visceral feel. The game feels good despite its somewhat weak game design. Summary. Good ideas and a great example of game design. Good job, Brain. A great example of game design where the content/depth is packed into the wrong things and taken away in the important things, and how that minimizes the replayability of the game. The game pads itself with a bunch of redundant gear and weapons and resource management systems while undeveloping the core twin-stick fundamentals such as enemy and bullet patterns, level and boss design, and core combat. Shmups like Dodonpachi Resurrection, or even other twin sticks like Android Cactus, love that game. I have 4,500 hours in that game. My game. I like that game. Go play that game. If you're listening to this, play that game. Do it and come and kick my ass because I want more competition, damn it. Play the game. It's a holy thing. No critiques of it, except just that the walls are drawn with really bad, like they're drawn in Microsoft Paint, and the enemies can get stuck on the poorly drawn walls, but everything else is perfect about it. Okay. Or the upcoming Sectori get much more depth, replayability, and variety out of the gameplay with much less attacks due to their intelligent game design and emphasis on the right things. Kill Knight is a diffident walk in the right direction to expand on the twin-stick shmup experience, but unfortunately not enough study and thought in game design has been given to see its true potential. I recommend deeper analysis of games like Devil May Cry 3, Ninja Gaiden 2, Dodonpachi, Ketsui, and Sectori to understand what makes them so great and where Kill Knight is falling short of its potential. Last aside, though it served no role in changing my review from positive to negative, I do want to note that the I didn't know that. The devs muted him for criticizing parts of the game. Yep, that's valid to complain about. I didn't even remember. Even though I've already played the game a lot historically, I feel that is sort of a sign of poor artists, and the feeling is emphasized by how much view of the game changed over time. I just don't feel the game mechanics and game design hold up well months after release, whereas truly good arcade games still hold up decades later. It's not a bad game by any means, it's still fairly solid. I just grew apathetic to it in the end. Yeah, this is a very good review. I agree with most of the things he says, like, the enemy design, I'm okay with the enemy design, but I think the biggest problem is that the most dangerous enemies all have insta-kill or quick kill mechanics tied to them. And since the game operates off of a permadeath thing, it's like you can't have enemies like that are either insta-killed or insta-kill you in a game where you only have one life. Like, that's just a fundamental contradiction in design philosophy. I think this game could be just fine even with that aside. It'd be just fine if only they added some good equipment and made the equipment play unique to each other, like unique to themselves. If they just gave more thought in the important equipment, I think this game would be 10 times better, honestly. But yeah, it's a really important review. It's really good. But yeah, I still love this game. It's still a really good game. I still play it a lot. But it could be so much more than it is.